Okay, welcome everyone. My name's Ted Malone, and if you're looking at your program, you can see that I am most definitely not Elisabetta Romano. Unfortunately, she was called away, and so I took over her spot. And because of some issues with our customer Tellus, who's rolling out some of our cloud TV technology, and they were not able to participate either, we had to switch the topic just a little bit, so it's more about how pay TV operators in general are moving to the cloud, Tellus being one of them. But I can't speak on behalf of Tellus, so I can tell you in general the kinds of things we're doing. But I'll have to defer to them on any specific questions. If you were here specifically about learning what Tellus is doing, I can talk to that more in general. So, anyway. My name's Ted Malone, as I said. I'm responsible for TV and media strategy. I've been in the TV business for about 25 years now. In the early days at Silicon Graphics, later on helping launch TiVo. Then I was in charge of product management for Sling, for the Slingbox, and participated in working at then EchoStar and Microsoft and now Ericsson. So I've really seen a lot of the transformations that have happened in the consumer and the pay TV business, and so I want to kind of share a little bit of insights there. I don't really want this to come off as any sort of a sales pitch for Ericsson, because we're one of many players in this space. Instead, I want to share some of our experiences and potentially give you some ideas of how you and your businesses can either participate in the ecosystem, potentially partner with one of our customers or with Ericsson ourselves. I think there's a lot of opportunities that will come out in this conversation. It's really specifically centered around pay TV operators that have understood the need to modernize their experiences. And so I want to kind of walk through kind of the why and the how. And then I'm going to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So if you do have questions, I appreciate you maybe just making a little note on one of your free Hyatt notepads, and we'll save them to the end. Thank you. Okay, so I said it wasn't going to be a sales pitch, but I'm going to give you one resume slide, really because I think in my experience having worked for Ericsson in the United States, there's a lot of people who think that we make cell phones or something like that. So I think it's probably better to just say real quick who Ericsson is and what we do. So Ericsson's about 100,000 people based in Sweden, although we have development centers all over the world. Probably our biggest product is actually cell phone towers as a company. So about 40% of the world's cell phone traffic goes through Ericsson radio towers. So that's probably the thing that pays the bills. On the TV and media side, it's been about the last 10 years that Ericsson has been investing heavily in TV and media. Several acquisitions. I came in through an acquisition from Microsoft from the old Ultimate TV, Web TV, Media Room days from Microsoft. But there's a bunch of other companies that we've integrated over the last 10 years and migrated or evolved some of those products into what we would consider more modern or current generation products. So we've assembled a pretty significant team of industry experts. And now we power about between 19 and 20 million pay TV subscribers. That works out to close to 30 million set-top boxes that are running full pay TV experiences based on our software. We also handle playout for some TV channels. So we actually play out about 500 managed TV channels. We've won some Emmys, and we're a pretty international company. So we know a bit about what we're talking about here. We are a significant player in the TV and media vendor space alongside companies like Cisco or Huawei, Aris, those kinds of companies. So when you look at what I think differentiates Ericsson from others in this space, part of it is the fact that we have a deep experience in mobile. And we believe that mobility is going to shape kind of the future of the TV and media entertainment experience. So if you think about mobile as being a significant asset for Ericsson, a lot of these TV and media assets And then you start dialing in the topic of this conversation, which is more about the cloud and scalability, et cetera. I think you can see that we feel like these key elements form kind of a winning combination. And I think hopefully you'll get to see some of that here. So no more talking about us. All right, so the TV and media industry, and I think everybody here is probably a TV and media consumer of some form or another, but the industry has really been going through kind of a slow and long, drawn-out transformation. Sometimes it feels like it's happening quickly with things like Netflix or Hulu or what have you, but the pay TV business really changes in a relatively slow pace. If you look back close to 20 years ago, there were some fairly significant disruptions that started happening that created a trend that exists today in the market. And that is somewhere around, let's call it 20 years ago, the cable companies started realizing that they have a bunch of subscribers and they needed new ways to monetize those subscribers. They were already selling TV and they were selling some advertising and they wanted to look at dialing in some other services. And the concept of kind of the triple play or bundling of services was born. And so the cable companies started offering telephone, and then the phone companies were a little bit concerned about that because suddenly the cable guys were competing with them, and so then the phone companies started getting into the TV business. And if you kind of fast forward to today, you see Comcast continued that trend with what you might consider vertical integration by investing upstream in the acquisition of NBC Universal. It was announced last week that AT&T is, after barely managing to digest and integrate DirecTV, they're now off saying they're going to buy Time Warner, the remaining Time Warner assets, not the cable assets that were already sold. So you can see that there's a lot of this transformation happening, and the types of operators that are out there are changing. And consumers, at the same time, they're starting to purchase devices and use services that are completely new ways of interacting. And so that's, I think, something that is probably obvious to anybody who's attending this conference is there's all kinds of different ways that TV and media type content are delivered to consumers, primarily over mobile connections, but even in home connections. I think the distribution mechanisms are changing, and consumers' expectations are actually driving some demand that the operators have to respond to if they're going to survive. And so I think the old school pay TV operators realize if they are going to compete in the new world, they need to be able to act and behave like an internet company as opposed to acting and behaving like the old walled garden approach that they used to have, that they need to be more open and they need to move off of kind of their legacy enterprise IT type systems and onto more of a modern approach towards delivering TV and media services. So it's now these worlds have kind of started to merge and converge. And so I think what you're seeing is some of the business convergence that I talked about, where it's hard to label somebody as a cable company or a movie studio or anything anymore because there's so much overlap in the investment, and there's been a lot of consolidation in the marketplace. For pay TV operators specifically, the number of operators has been shrinking as the large operators have been acquiring some more of the mid-size operators. And I think what that's doing is it's giving some of these large players the ability to offer competitive services, not just over their own networks, but also over the top, because they have a lot of the bargaining power necessary in order to compete in this space. So I think you're seeing that happen on the business side. On the network side, you're also seeing quite a bit of investment in generic IP ways of delivering media. So cable, the old cable networks are primarily RF networks, and a lot of channels were distributed over RF. Well, the largest cable companies are all migrating their systems to IP. And suddenly the IPTV systems that they're using to deliver cable service start looking virtually identical to the IPTV systems that telcos are using to deliver over their VDSL or fiber or some of the more telco-based network solutions. You're also seeing large players, back to my example of triple play starting 15 or 20 years ago, now you're getting operators who triple wasn't enough, they need quad play or 5 play. I don't think people say quintuple play, but quad play for sure, where they want to bring wireless service into the mix. AT&T, if you see advertising at all, you see they're getting pretty big about that, where you'll now get AT&T wireless alongside TV, home phone, and broadband. So that would be the kind of quad play thing that they're doing. And so a lot of the cable guys are getting involved in MVNO kinds of relationships where they will partner with a mobile operator and brand a mobile service and deliver that alongside their TV and their broadband service. So you're seeing an increase in the relationship that the service provider has with the consumer. And what I think is happening is the definition of the operator is changing, where they're all starting to look the same. The big operators have assets that include wired, wireless, television, et cetera. And we can kind of think of these as blended operators that kind of defy categorization, if you will. And I think what this leads to is kind of this internet era of TV, which is the old way of delivering television is starting to fall by the wayside, and everybody is moving towards IP, towards streaming media, whether it's unicast or multicast kinds of broadcast streams. Everybody's moving over towards IP for delivery, and I think that's good for a lot of us in this room, because a lot of the proprietary systems that were locked in the past are moving out, and it's opening up the networks and it's opening up the consumer sockets to the point that we can deliver some much more interesting and compelling experiences. So I want to go ahead and give you just a little bit of a video to give you a peek at what we call pay TV at web speed, which is a pay TV operator who can deliver a service that operates as if they were a web company being a Netflix or a Facebook or somebody who grew up and was created in kind of the web DevOps kinds of ways of running. And I think the pay TV operators have a lot they can learn from that. And it's a journey, a transformational journey for them, because they need to leave behind some of their old systems, and they need to evolve into these more agile ways of working. So let me go ahead and play a video, and I've got hopefully a little audio for you guys. Maybe it's kind of goofy dance party audio, but let's go ahead and see how it. And this is about a minute, so I'm not going to make you watch too much. Okay, so that platform is Media First, which is the platform that we're working to deploy with Tellus. And there were a lot of buzzwords in that video, but I can tell you that one of the reasons why Tellus, and they're primarily based in Western Canada, but they're a large pay TV operator in Canada. And one of the reasons why they feel the need to have a platform that can deliver this is they want to have a flexible system that can deploy different types of pay TV experiences, whether it's video on demand, live TV, transactional video, and they want to display it across all of the consumer screens, whether it's a set-top box in the home, whether it's a tablet, whether it's a mobile. If it's outside the home, they want to be able to deliver as much of the experience as they can. They want to be able to very flexibly create bundles of programs, because I think they understand that where the pay TV world is going, that the ability to create more smaller and more tailored bundles, whether they're skinny bundles or whether they're niche bundles, that they need a platform that's very flexible to deploy all of that to their consumers. And they realize that they have to be able to do that with a system that is smart and delivers rich looking user interface with posters and good metadata and the ability to search for your programming across all of their systems, but also third-party systems, whether it's Netflix or YouTube or what have you. They really want to deliver a cross-platform entertainment experience where they are the kind of the go-to provider that delivers this to the end user, and that their back-end system is flexible enough that they can plug in different modules and things as they come online. So if they feel like some new innovation comes out, they need to be able to quickly kind of integrate that into their pay TV experience, or new service launches. They don't want to have to rip and replace large IT systems in order to integrate new third-party services. And they also recognized, I think you probably saw in here, that the pay TV experience is starting to become personal in many ways the way our phones became personal. So TV kind of is still, a lot of people perceive that pay TV is a set-top box or a television in the living room, whereas your phone is a very personal thing. Like if you have an iPhone and I have an iPhone and you look at our two iPhones, they're probably going to be configured very differently. And the feeling is that that's the kind of thing that consumers want from their pay TV service, is the ability to personalize the experience. And so what we're doing is bringing that personalization to the mobile screens, but also teaching the fixed screens, set-top boxes and things like that, how to adapt. So if you walk into the room and it senses that your phone is there, we're going to assume it's your phone and you're carrying it. And so we will then adapt the system based on the people that are in the room. And so that kinds of personalization, we think, is important to the service provider delivering the kinds of experiences and the kinds of pay TV service that if they don't offer it, the consumers will find it somewhere else. So let's kind of break down this pay TV at web speed concept, and let me talk a little bit about, okay. That says open, agile, and intelligent. Sorry, that's a little bit hard to read. So let's break that down a little bit. So part of the topic here is the cloud, and I promise I'm going to get to a little bit more cloud-specific stuff here. I think as we build this next-gen TV platform on cloud tech, one of the things that's important is for us to be open and extensible, so that if somebody comes along, maybe there's somebody out here who has a better recommendation engine, or they have some other sort of premium service that's doing some sort of facial recognition or some other kind of thing that they want to integrate into the system. The platform needs to be open and extensible to do that. So one of the core principles we think that anybody needs is to be thinking about that openness. You don't necessarily have to put it all on GitHub and open source it, but you need to be thinking about how you're going to build in an open, interoperable kind of way. Second, agile. And the one thing that's really driving our customers to kind of migrate to these more cloud-based TV systems is they're feeling immense pressure from from new market entrants, disruptors, if you will, delivering TV experiences in a way that is taking their subscribers away. And so they need the ability to be able to compete and move quickly. And over the last few years, as we've been working with customers to try to solve some of these problems, we've heard huge frustration with their internal IT departments. So they feel like building on a cloud platform will give them the ability to not be so dependent on their IT organization to roll out servers and deploy software onto those servers. So that's a big kind of core tenet for us. And then the other thing is intelligent. So on the analytics side, I think we feel like one of the real assets that you get by centralizing your information in a cloud type infrastructure is you get access to very scalable and very rapid analytic type modules. So whether it's running some sort of personalization or whether it's predictive kinds of analyses that you get out of some of the more advanced analytic systems, we think part of the key here to monetizing these systems for the operators, for the pay TV operators, is to be able to understand what their consumers are doing and to be able to make recommendations, to target advertising or promotions, that having a smart system is part and parcel with them making money. And if you have spent any time on the business side of pay TV, you'll recognize that it's very challenging. If you think about movie theaters, the reason we pay $7 for a thing of popcorn is most of the money goes to the people that are producing the movies, and so the only way for the movie theaters to make money is to sell $7 bags of popcorn. Well, pay TV is heading down that same path where content's becoming more expensive and consumers are only willing to pay so much for it. So the aggregators, these operators that are delivering bundles of pay TV service, are facing shrinking margins. And one of the only ways for them to adapt and to deal with those pressures is to be able to look for ways to make money off of their subscribers, not necessarily directly from their subscribers. So we think having an intelligent system that understands that and that need in the marketplace is also going to be something that's important for pay TV operators. Okay, so here's an eye chart on cloud, just because I promised I'd show something on cloud. And I'll get in. This is a kind of more of a architecture diagram than an actual architecture diagram, which is, I think, as we've been building a new pay TV service to run on the cloud, we're doing it in a very containerized microservice way. The point being, back to some of the original things I was saying around Agile and open, we think that the only way to deliver these kinds of pay TV services on the cloud is to truly embrace the cloud, not just as a way to host a VM or not just virtualization, but real cloud tech that allows you to auto scale, allows you to deal with potentially new services coming online quickly, to deal with rollouts or rollbacks in a very dynamic way, to do things like A/B testing, to test different offers or different ways of monetizing. So what we've done is we've created kind of groups of microservices in these core categories, and we've done this in a way not because it's actually built this way, but it's packaged up so that customers understand it. Because when we go to these pay TV operators, they know what what compression is, and they know what streaming is, and so we've tried to bucket these services into ways that they can understand, but what they really are is just a whole bunch of components packaged up in Docker and delivered across different cloud systems. So it could be a public cloud. We're doing work on Azure and AWS. It could be private cloud. We're doing a bunch of OpenStack things for private cloud. We even have some systems that run on some legacy systems that still run on bare metal. But then we provide an orchestration layer that allows you to distribute that. And I think one of the challenges with the cloud when it comes to pay TV is you can't necessarily stream all of your TV through a cloud and actually make any money at all, because a lot of the clouds charge very significant egress costs. So if you're delivering pay-per-view or SVOD, it's probably not a problem, because the distribution of that asset to the consumer comes along with kind of explicit transactional cost, and so you can run the numbers on it, and which we have, and so the cloud ends up being pretty good for VOD, whether it's SVOD, which is kind of what Netflix uses AWS for, or transactional VOD. For live TV specifically, it becomes much more problematic, and so in those cases, what we're doing with Tellus specifically is a hybrid deployment where the VOD assets and the catch-up TV and some of those kinds of things live in the cloud, and the live TV is compressed and streams from their systems over their network. And so by separating the streaming into managed live TV streams coming from their head end over their network and kind of unmanaged on-demand streams coming from the cloud, they're able to kind of offer the best of both worlds, in that they get the scalability and the cloud intelligence off their back end and off a lot of the on-demand and the user experience. But the costly part of it, which is these live TV streams where they probably want to multicast as much as possible, continue to be originated out of their head end. So let me, oops. Hello. There we go. Another kind of cloud type thing is that I want to run through is kind of this idea of continuous engagement or a DevOps relationship. So one of the things that we had to learn as we moved from kind of traditional packaged software model of deployment, where we would do 1 or 2 releases a year and we would deliver the software to our customers and they would deploy it onto their servers, and some number of months up to a year later, a consumer would get that new experience. Well, that's far from Agile. So once we start building these new systems running on the cloud, we needed to stand up a relationship and a deployment model with these operators that allowed them to actually get access to this agility. So we had to teach them a lot of things that they didn't already know, as far as how DevOps works, how customer support works in this new world, how new features are rolled out and rolled back, how their user testing works, all of those kinds of things. So I think in order to move them from getting a new release every 6 months to getting a new release every 6 weeks, which is now how we roll out our new software releases, we had to create kind of this whole new way of things. And so you can kind of think of this as really business transformation more than product transformation, which is, you guys may all know how to build things in a modern way, but it doesn't mean that your customers know how to buy it in that modern way. And so I think this idea of continuous engagement required a lot of business consulting and training on our part to build the new relationships and the new ways of working between us as a vendor and these operators who really they knew what they wanted. They just didn't understand what they had to do in order to actually get it. And so I think if you look at some of the big companies like Comcast who are running a DevOps system, you'll hear from them that you really don't get the advantage of cloud platforms if you're not willing to run a full DevOps operation. So I'll skip that. If anybody has specific questions, we can come back to it, but I know I'm running late on time. And so we think at the end of the day, if you do these things, if you start to integrate these cloud services and you start building a new set of TV experiences that are based on the cloud, and you do it in an engagement model that allows you to be very agile, that you will then have all of the pieces necessary to deliver continuous innovation towards both your business as well as to your consumers. And so that, I think, is what we consider pay TV at web speed, and it's what we're in the process of rolling out with Tellus and 3 or 4 operators around the world. and welcome the opportunity to answer any questions you have or have some follow-up conversations afterwards. And I don't think we have a mic, so if anybody has any questions, if you can kind of make sure I hear them, then I'll repeat them for the webcast. I should have put somebody in the audience with some softballs. Yeah.
You mentioned the 6 weeks delivery time, and you also mentioned that you still have set-top boxes.
Yep.
How does that fit? I mean, updating set-top boxes is always an adventure.
Yep.
What's your experience?
That's a good question. So the question is, it's really great to be able to deliver cloud-based services on a 6-week cadence, but how do you deal with fragile things like set-top boxes where if something goes wrong, you don't necessarily want to be testing and updating your set-top box on a 6-week basis? It's a great question, and what we did was we changed the model that we use on the set-top box for software development. So what we have is on the set-top box, we built what we call an app shell, which if you think about, it's a very mobile app kind of way of developing. So the app shell is deployed onto the set-top box, but the entire experience that runs in that shell comes from the service. So we moved over to all HTML5 and JavaScript for all of our UI and for all of the user experience, and the shell kind of boots up and handles platform security, DRM, and those kinds of things, and then it loads a user experience that comes from the cloud. So we definitely do not upgrade that app shell that's running on the box every 6 weeks. That's something that ideally you put it out there and you actually don't need to update it unless you're adding something that runs below that. So at the driver level, maybe you're doing something with some voice recognition drivers or a new remote control, or you're doing something that needs to operate kind of below the hood in the set-top stack. Then we might need to do some rollouts, but the core app that's running on there, we still build and deploy in more of a waterfall model, whereas the UI, which is cloud hosted and in some cases even cloud rendered, is delivered from the Agile cloud-based backend. It's a great question. Yep. Yep.
So how do you advise those service providers to explain or to contain the user's expectation? Does it really make sense to support all the platforms?
Right. Okay, let me try to paraphrase that just so I repeat it back for the camera. So I think the question is a little bit twofold. It's if you're delivering a multi-screen experience across set-top boxes and large screen TVs that have advanced things like 4K or HDR, and then you also want to be able to deliver that same experience, meaning from the same back end across maybe a mobile phone that has a different resolution, different hardware capabilities, et cetera. How do you do that from a platform standpoint? And then also, how do you communicate to the user what they're getting? So is that about right?
I would say more like managing the expectation, because you cannot deliver the same experience.
Managing their expectation. So that, to me, that's kind of like what they're getting, but I see what you mean. So first things first, when we operate these multi-screen systems, we pre-package the media for all of at least a handful of resolutions and formats and stream characteristics to work on across different systems. So when we compress the incoming streams, whether they're live or on demand, we package it up in a handful of predefined ways. So it might be different resolutions, it might be different methods of packaging. Some of that happens, like some of the packaging happens on the fly, but some of the compression and things happens ahead of time. So if it's being prepped for 4K and HDR, that's great, but we also want to make sure that there's a version that's designed to run across a mobile network, onto a tablet or a phone. And we also build into our rights engine a certain set of rules that are configurable by the operator. So, excuse me. So for instance, an iPhone can't say, I want the 4K stream with HDR. That's just a rule we build. Whether it can play it or not, the way we've defined it is, you don't get to ask for a 4K HDR stream if you're on an iPhone. And so there's some rules that you can put in place. Now, I think you're right in that a lot of these new things, whether it's UHD or Dolby Vision, HDR, I think it is creating some confusion for the consumers around like the thing that's happening now, where some people say in the business, say they'd rather have HD with HDR than 4K without HDR. And I think some of that is personal preference. Some of it is maybe a little bit of partiality coming out in the vendor community. I don't know how to answer the question of how do you set consumer expectations around that, because I agree with you, it's tough. And there's these innovations, kind of the average TV and media viewer doesn't really understand what you get with HDR any more than they understand what you get with, well, they might understand some branding like Blu-ray versus regular DVD or what have you, but I think we in the industry have created a lot of consumer confusion, and HDR is probably the best example of kind of a mess we've created. So I don't have a good answer to you on that one. Okay. I think that's it. I appreciate you all hanging in there till the end. And like I said, if anybody has more questions, feel free to come up afterwards. Cheers.